In part 4 of our Resident Evil recap, we spoke of the events of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which culminated in Jill's escape from Raccoon City and the city's eventual destruction. In part 5, we'll be covering Resident Evil Code Veronica. With Resident Evil Code Veronica, we move away from a lot of familiar stuff. We move away from the location of Raccoon City completely, which makes sense since Raccoon City got blown to smithereens. We also move a bit into the realm of the outlandish. Code Veronica is, in many ways, where Resident Evil started its changing focus to become much cornier and much more bizarre. Before we move into that, though, let's go way back to a name that hasn't come up in a while: the Ashford Family. We last spoke of Dr. Edward Ashford, one of the original Umbrella top dogs, and how, following bitter rivalry with Spencer and Marcus, he ended up dead, survived by his son Alexander Ashford. Well, Alexander, unlike Edward, was a lot more into genetics, and so his experiments were a little different from the zombie-making ones you usually see with the Umbrella folk. Alexander Ashford used his genetic know-how to engineer a clone of his great-great-grandmother, one Veronica Ashford, as part of what was dubbed the T. Veronica experiment. A freak accident during the cloning process, though, caused cloned zygote to split, resulting in two clones: Alexia Ashford, who Alexander had intended to create, and Alfred Ashford. The reason the Ashford twins were created was to create a child who could, as part of the internal power struggles that had been going on at Umbrella, ensure and solidify Ashford influence in the corporation, and as such, Alexander Ashford put the highest value on how intelligent both of them were. Right from their births, the twins were treated differently for this very reason. While Alfred was found to be above average intelligence, Alexia was a child prodigy and received all of the best education that could be had. For one reason or the other, though, they both resented their father, Alexander, and found solace only in the company of one another. Eventually, the twins discovered the truth of their birth and origins, and disgusted by it, they decided to retaliate against Alexander. They forced him to undergo a T. Veronica procedure himself and locked him away, even as his body mutated, and kept him sealed shut. Alexia soon picked up the pieces of the T. Veronica research, and not long afterward, she decided to experiment on herself. After injecting herself with the virus, she stored herself away cryogenically, figuring that the extended period that cryosleep would allow the virus to stay within her without being able to mutate her might yield favorable results, and telling her brother to wake her up when the time came. With Alexander and Alexia both publicly considered dead, Alfred became the head of the Ashford family, and though he went through rigorous training at Umbrella and managed to gain a certain amount of influence himself, the loss of his sister clearly did not sit well with him. His mental health continued to worsen, until finally he developed a second persona as Alexia herself, going as far as to even dress like her. The story of Code Veronica picks up many years later, in 1998. Roughly 3 months after the events of Resident Evil 2, Claire Redfield is still searching for her brother, Chris, and finally she thinks she's got a lead. She believes her brother is in an Umbrella Corporation facility in Paris, but when she infiltrates the lab, she finds out he isn't there. Soon, she gets herself caught, after which she is transported to another Umbrella facility over on the Ashford-owned Rockford Island. Her arrival at Rockford, as chance would have it, coincides with what looks like a greater conflict with the paramilitary group called HCF. And so, who is HCF led by? Well, none other than Albert Wesker himself. Yes, of course he isn't dead. Wesker, looking to get his hands on the T. Veronica virus, raids Rockford Island with his HCF soldiers as part of a sabotage operation, which results in much of the island's facilities failing, a T-virus strain being released, and multiple BOWs being set loose on the island. In the midst of all of this, and with the help of one Umbrella soldier named Rodrigo Juan Raval, Claire is able to escape from her cell, but immediately discovers that things are not going to get easier from here on out. Not only does she have to deal with another T-virus outbreak, it also seems Alfred Ashford thinks she is connected to the sabotage operation by HCF in some way and is hellbent on recapturing her. Soon afterward, Claire meets a certain someone named Steve Burnside, probably the most disliked character in the Resident Evil universe. Steve, as it turns out, is also a prisoner of Umbrella here on Rockford Island, thanks to run-ins that his father had with the corporation. Though their relationship immediately has its ups and downs, the two manage to work together well enough to get some things accomplished. For starters, Claire is able to communicate with Leon and tell him to get in touch with her brother, who clearly wasn't at the Paris lab, and tell him about Rockford Island and about her being there. Later, Claire and Steve are eventually able to get aboard a plane and flee from the Ashford residence. Alfred, however, had already set the plane on an autopilot course to someplace that decidedly isn't any safer than the Rockford Island, another umbrella facility in Antarctica. The facility in Antarctica, however, isn't faring very well either. Umbrella personnel from the Rockford facility had been retreating to the one in Antarctica as a result of all of the chaos on the island, and with them, they've also been bringing back the T-virus which they had been exposed. The Antarctica facility too is buckling under the weight of an outbreak. Soon after they've landed, Claire and Steve discover that the facility they're in is a few miles away from an observation base, and figure that they can probably commandeer a vehicle and escape to that base. As they look for one though, they encounter Alfred Ashford, who, of course, has followed them. A struggle ensues and Claire and Steve are somehow able to keep Alfred at bay and escape, but Alfred has one or two tricks up his sleeve. After his fight with Claire and Steve, he's able to awaken his sister, Alexia, and bring her out of cryosleep, now mutated by the T. Veronica strain. Claire and Steve, meanwhile, face another challenge as well when they accidentally free and face off against Alexander Ashford. Remember him? The man who created the Ashford twins was mutated by a forced T. Veronica experiment long ago and turned into a monster who was given the name Nosferatu. When they square off against him, Claire is able to attack Nosferatu's exposed heart and kill him, finally bringing an end to his tortured existence. Soon, Claire and Steve finally manage to find a truck, and when they proceed to drive off in it, hoping to escape from the Antarctica facility, which of course does not happen, soon they're attacked by creepy plant tentacle mutations. And where exactly did these come from? You see, reawakening Alexia was in fact the last significant thing Alfred did, because soon afterward he succumbed to the wounds from his fight against Claire and Steve and died. Furious about her brother's death, Alexia uses her newfound abilities thanks to her successful mutation and uses the aforementioned plant tentacle things to destroy the truck that Claire and Steve are escaping in. Immediately afterward, the two of them are dragged away back to the base as Alexia's prisoners. Let's pause here for just a moment and move the spotlight away from Claire for just a bit, because she's not the only leading playable character in Resident Evil Code Veronica. Just as crucial to the story and how it plays out is her brother. Claire's message to Chris through Leon is successfully delivered, and immediately upon learning of his sister's whereabouts, he heads to Rockford Island to rescue her. When Chris gets to the island though, he doesn't find his sister. No, instead he ends up coming face to face once again with Albert Wesker. Wesker explains to him that he hadn't actually died when they last met, and that the incident actually ended up giving him superpowers thanks to the virus inside of him. Chris also eventually learns that Claire managed to escape from the island and fly away to the Antarctica facility, and so both Chris and Wesker head to the base separately and for different reasons. Chris to rescue Claire, and Wesker because he finds out that's where Alexia is, and since that's where Alexia is, that is where he figures he'll get his hands on the T. Veronica virus as well. If he's able to kill Chris and his sister while he's there as well, that's just bonus for the good old Wesker. When Chris gets to the base, he does manage to find Claire, but their reunion is short-lived. After he helped free her, Claire tells him that she needs to go look for Steve, and she does find him, only not in the state that she had been hoping. She discovers that he'd been injected with the T. Veronica virus, and soon, the virus begins to take hold of him. Steve mutates rapidly, and as he does, he attacks Claire. But the mutation, as it turns out, isn't able to completely take over Steve. He fights it from within and is able to retake control long enough to stop himself from attacking Claire. As he does so, he then turns his attention to Alexia, but Alexia is far more powerful of a beast, fully in control of her own mutation. Alexia deals a deadly blow to Steve, and predictably enough, it proves to be too much for him to handle. As he lies weak and broken, his body reverts to his normal self, he professes his love for Claire, and dies. But what's going on with Wesker? Well, he's busy with Alexia too. He wants the virus from her, and she obviously isn't going to just freely hand it over. The two superpowered figures lock horns while Chris witnesses their fight. But just as it seems Alexia might have the upper hand, Wesker flees, leaving Alexia to focus on Chris instead. Chris manages to temporarily beat her, but temporary is the operative word here. Chris activates the facility's self-destruct sequence and reunites with Claire. As the two are attempting to flee from the base though, they're attacked by Alexia once again. In the final battle after a tense encounter, they're able to use a special weapon called the linear launcher to finally, once and for all, bring Alexia down. But of course, It still isn't over. While Claire gets into the cockpit of the plane and prepares for liftoff, Chris crosses paths with Wesker. Telling Claire to begin taking off, he takes on Wesker in a hand-to-hand duel, which proves to be a monumentally stupid decision. Thanks to his superpowers, Wesker absolutely wallops him. As Chris lies beaten though, he causes some hanging girders to collapse on Wesker's head, which doesn't kill him, sure, but does leave him injured, and gives Chris enough time to escape. As Chris escapes with Claire on their stolen plane, Wesker promises him that their next meeting will also be their last, and leaves as well. But Wesker never leaves until he's got what he came looking for, which he did here as well, of course, because when he escapes, he does so with the Veronica infected corpse of Steve Burnside. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.